Hey y'all, welcome back. My name is Sarah and I just love to talk about movies. If you guys are interested, I also have a movie blog where I write about movies, so you guys can check that out. But today, I want to talk about one of my favorite horror films of all time. I think it was one of the most creative horror movies that I had seen at that time. And we're going to talk about Bones. I don't know if you guys are familiar or not, but when this movie came out, I was so hyped to see it. It has Pamela Grier and Snoop Dogg in it. What got me is the story. This is a story of love, murder, and revenge. It has that classic through line in the story of, someone is betrayed, love is lost, and the heartache is still there, but also, blood and gore. So, Bones begins in the 70s, where Jimmy Bones, played by Snoop Dogg, sort of ran this neighborhood back in the day. And he wasn't dealing hard drugs. He wasn't, cutting people's hands off. People had a lot of respect for him because he had respect for people. So the story begins in the past, where we see the character of Jimmy Bones sort of walking around the neighborhood, interacting with people. People are smiling, laughing. Kids are playing outside. Cut to 20 years later. It's the same neighborhood. And it's completely blighted. Windows are covered over. There's graffiti everywhere. People are in a hurry to get where they're going. And you see a drug deal going down in front of this same brick building in the opening scenes. The drug dealers get paid, and then I guess to avoid, in case of entrapment, they tell them that they put the drugs that they paid for in that house. Yeah, that the drugs are under a brick in the house. So they go inside. Spooky ensues. Next thing you know, you see this huge black dog, and he starts chasing a man down the street. The man runs into his house. He has all of these locks on his doors. He says this really creepy line about ghouls. It's such a great opening because it sets the viewer up to, you think you have a handle on who people are and what this neighborhood is, and you really don't. So cut to the next scene where you see this group of young people pull up, and then they walk out in front of that same brick building. In observing their conversations, you found out that they have bought this building, that they want to renovate the building and make it into a nightclub in the middle of this neighborhood. So then you start to see other characters come into play. You see them, and you hear the dialogue going back and forth, and then you see other people in the neighborhood going about their normal day-to-day, interacting with them, and you get an idea of their personalities. So you meet Pearl, who is the local psychic, and you meet her daughter, and there's an interaction with the same man that was chased by that big black dog. The catalyst is these kids bought this building and are trying to move into the neighborhood, and then you have all of the key players that start to come out of the woodwork and into the story. As the story continues, you learn who the building used to be owned by. Jimmy Bones, the same guy who ran the neighborhood back in the day, who mysteriously disappeared. You learn bits and pieces of his story through other characters as time goes on. You learn how this disparate group of characters were once very close, and how a terrible event pushed them completely far away from each other, some physically, some financially, as the spooky intensifies. And then you see his influence over the building itself. When the kids kind of go into the building and try to renovate it, clean it up, that's the kind of stuff, you see shadows, you see figures. There's this one scene where There are so many iconic scenes that I've seen replicated in other movies that just have their own style that has never been like properly replicated. One of them is they put a bed upstairs and he's like listening to music with his eyes closed on this bed, and the entire wall on the side of him turns into like this ghastly wall of bodies that at first appear to be stuck there. And it's huge. It's like all of these people, you can see their hands kind of moving, heads kind of moving, and he's completely unaware. And then they come out of the wall and they start to move closer and closer to him until he wakes up. And at first he doesn't look around, doesn't see anything, and then there's a shadow, and the shadow like screams at him, and then he gets up. Later on in the story, as his power grows and his influence intensifies, there's some really gross, nasty scenes that, I don't know if you guys have seen them, but there's one scene where they open the nightclub and the dog upstairs starts to vomit maggots, which is disgusting by itself. There's like a burp. First of all, the sound of it, there's like a burp, and then it's like a flood of maggots just shoots out of its mouth. And then the maggots fall through the floorboards and onto the people in the nightclub below. And people are drinking and people are eating, and the maggots are falling in the food and the drinks. And it's disgusting, especially when because people are dancing, people are in like full early 20s, late 90s club gear. So when somebody notices it and people start screaming and running and there's all this chaos, before that happens, Maurice, one of the characters, is sort of seduced by this mystery woman in this like a black fishnet outfit. Epic. She's got this great ring on that like catches the light, and he's like looking at her and she's looking at him, not saying a word. She goes wandering upstairs, he goes wandering after her and doesn't come back down, if you know what I mean. So it's like all of these crazy scenes. We learn about the betrayal, who was betrayed, and we learn about why they were betrayed. Some people die, good guys die, bad guys die. Jimmy Bones comes back from the dead to seek bloody revenge. And when I tell you his revenge is mighty, and has been a long time coming. So when I tell you they got theirs, they got theirs. In an attempt to lay Jimmy Bones back to rest, revelations occur, secrets are revealed, or some things that are not really a secret, but you get what I mean. We see that underside, we see that purgatory world right below or right outside, as Cynthia, or on top, as Cynthia says, the real world, reality. And it's not crazy. It's not like Beetlejuice-esque. It doesn't look like that. It's very quiet, and there's just a red light everywhere. Everything is lit red, and there are no people, but you can tell that something is slightly off. It's quieter. It's more like a maze. They're trying to find their way out. They're trying to sort of exorcise Jimmy's spirit from the place by returning things that belong to him and getting out of the house. Jimmy Bones gets his revenge, and at the end of the movie, it's left open-ended, so you're not quite sure how it really ended. It's not just about a story of murder, because Jimmy Bones was murdered. It is not just that he was murdered. It was the betrayal that was involved in his murder and all of the effects that his murder had on the neighborhood and on the people. What I love about this movie is not just the story, it's also the creativity involving certain things, like the black dog The black dog is a symbol. It shows up sometimes in horror movies. It's supposed to be a dark omen. And I love that they included that in the story. It's so unique, and I've never seen it done quite this way, because the dog is sort of like a familiar. He can see what it sees and everything. And the thing that you see it doing the most is feeding. It's constantly eating, and the way that they film it is like rapid motion. So you see it just gobbling up food and things that are not food really fast. And it's like grotesque and different. The discovery of Jimmy Bones' body gives him the opportunity to enter the real world and start to affect it. So I do like stories like that, where it's like, before, he had influence over this house because this is where he died. And that influence can take different forms. He has this dog as his like familiar, and the dog can go out into the community, basically harassing people. And later on you learn why. But not attacking or killing anybody in the neighborhood, just being a nuisance. But I have to tell y'all, they have some of the greatest dialogue I have heard in a horror movie. One of my favorite lines, Ricky Harris plays Eddie Mack, Eddie Mack sounds like he sells drugs, but that's neither here or there. Great names. Pearl, great names. We got Jimmy Bones, we got Lupovich or Loopy Lou, the dirty cop. One of my favorite lines is Eddie Mack says to the two guys who are selling the drugs to the yuppies at the beginning of the movie, he was yelling at them because he thought they killed them. He was like, nobody does that kind of stuff around this neighborhood but me. And then he says, I'ma burn your asses and snort your ashes. Do you understand me? I love it. The line was delivered so well. I remember replaying that because I was like, wait a minute, what? There's so many components that make the story so memorable to me. So there's this great sequence between Cynthia and her mom. Cynthia is sleeping at the house because she's trying to, annoy her mama, but she told her not to go into that house. And she thinks that Patrick has come in and is like lying next to her. They're not doing nothing, just asleep next to her. And he starts to you can't see him, but the outline under the sheets kind of comes around, hugs her waist. At the same time, her mother is having a seance with some people from the neighborhood. As she starts to get deeper and deeper into the seance, it appears as though she's having a vision. And the vision is of Cynthia lying on a bed, very similarly, but she appears to be almost having a nightmare, but in slow motion, rolling back and forth. And as she moves back and forth, all of this blood starts to come from underneath the sheets. Her eyes are closed. It's like she's asleep, but she keeps rolling back and forth, her arms coming up, her hands flexing, moving back and forth. And the more she does that, she starts to slowly sink into the blood until her entire body kind of disappears, and then Pearl wakes up. Such a great sequence. The combination of creative horror creature design and the way that they're telling the story, I think is really unique. Overall, Bones, I would give it a 4 out of 5. I think the design was great. I like the way they told the story. There were some spots that, not plot holes exactly, but I wish they were a bit more filled in. That gap in time is so sudden. The fact that a lot of the original key players live in close proximity but don't deal with each other seems, I don't know. It's not like it's not believable, but just feel like there was a bit more there. The acting was great. I felt like the characters were very filled out. And I'd recommend it. If you can't handle gore, yuck gore, I would not recommend this. There's blood and guts everywhere. Oh, I just thought of another detail that I really, really loved is when Jimmy Bones comes for Eddie Mac. And Eddie Mac is where he always is, at the bar. And Eddie Mac is a whole mess, really high, in the middle of an escapade with his girl, Snowflake. Hilarious. But also like, yuck. Jimmy Bones comes by, he's got that blade, and he kind of scrapes it along the felt on the pool table, and it starts to bleed. It's stuff like that, it's details like that are so unique, and you only get a second of it, but it creates such a great impact and adds just a little extra to the story that I love. Top 5 for sure, Bones is on my list. I saw this, I was way too young to watch it and didn't really get a lot of the themes until I watched it again years later. But it's still, I watched it recently and I'm like, still a classic. It is still a classic horror film. So if you guys are into like love, murder, loss, ghosts, ghoulies, I recommend that you all check it out. So thank you all for spending your time here with me today. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you all later.